This is quite possibly the most intense and strangest encounter I've ever had. Not only did it happen to me, but also my dog and my friend's dog too. In our local woods, there's a path beside a cliff face, and on those cliffs are a series of small caves that we call the banana caves. I was never sure why they were called that, but if I had to guess, it's because they were made of limestone and had a slight yellow tint to them. Maybe it was the shape of the caves, but that's not really important. The path we walked was frequently walked by many people. Locals, dog walkers like us, bird watchers, you name it. It's not exactly a quiet path, which is why this was as shocking as it was. My dog and my friend's dog are great, and they're amazing off their leashes. They just go and do what they need to do and don't bother anyone or any other dogs. Of course, dogs will be dogs. Mine being a bit of an adventurer, it began climbing the bank that day toward the cliff face and near the caves. I tried to call him back down more than once. At one point, I called him again, but something had caught his eye. His head went real low to the ground, and his ears went straight back. I thought this was strange, because if it was a rabbit or a squirrel, he would have just chased it. But no, he stood as still as a statue. I shouted louder this time for him to come back down the path. Then there was a huge commotion. He went into fight mode. He backed up while barking and snapping at whatever the heck it was. I began to climb the bank myself in a panic, making sure it wasn't a badger or worse. My dog charged forward, and that was it. He yelped and barked, and it was awful. What I saw was this monkey-like creature with pointed ears. It had no fur at all that I could see. It was black and leathery, with black eyes. It had latched onto my dog's neck, hanging onto it, like the way a sloth would do to a tree or a caretaker. My dog shook and rolled fiercely, but this thing just held on. It felt like ages before I finally reached my dog. I'd been running as fast as I could up the bank. My friend's dog joined in on the commotion as she ran past me and began barking and snarling at this creature and my dog. As I got closer, I picked up a stick and instantly swung at the little creature, terrified it was seriously hurting my dog. I hit the thing directly in the back of its head, but it didn't budge straight away, so I hit it again, and this time I cracked it against its back. The creature then jumped off my dog, just like you'd imagine a monkey would. I got a look at it again and noticed it had a bat-looking face with two sharp front teeth. It did this little spin and looked like it tripped sort of, but eventually it dashed off on all fours, climbing up the cliff face and disappearing over the cliff edge. Luckily, my dog was pretty much unharmed. He had a slight cut above his eye, a cut on his nose, and a cut on his chest that looked worse than what it was. There was just a lot of blood. I have no idea what this thing was, but my friend saw it too from the bottom of the bank and confirmed the exact same thing I saw. I believe it to be a goblin of some sort. Otherwise, I have no idea. If you have any idea, please enlighten me. I'd love to find out more. I live in the northeast of England, if that helps.
This story isn't my own. This is my mother and aunt's experience. My grandparents had taken my mom and my aunt to a sleepover when they were young. My grandparents were your traditional Hispanic people, so when they went to drop off my mom and aunt, they stayed for a while talking to the parents of the girl who was throwing the sleepover. Let's call her Janet. Janet had a little sister who she shared a room with. Let's call her Mari. There were about 8 girls there in total. It was around 10 p.m. when Janet said that they have to sit in a circle to play a board game. Time passed, and eventually it was 11 p.m. To paint the picture, the girls were sitting in a circle, and Janet and Mari were in the section of the room with a corner behind them, and my aunt and mother were in front of them. While playing the game, my aunt started to notice something behind Janet and Mari. It looked like a little girl. She had on a white dress that was grimy and dirty, and had long black hair and long fingernails, almost like the girl in The Grudge. My aunt was frozen in fear and was unsure if it was just her who was seeing the girl. She started whispering my mom's name and asked, "You see her too, right? Please tell me you see her in the corner of the room." Trying not to make a scene, she kept a smile on her face while asking this. My mother looked at the corner slowly, trying to make it seem like everything was normal. My mother was horrified by what she saw and froze just like my aunt had. The girl that was behind Janet and Mari had now shown her face. Her eyes were very wide and bloodshot. Her mouth was sewn together and her smile was so wide the stitches started to tear. My mom and aunt screamed at the top of their lungs and asked Janet and Mari who the girl behind them was. Janet and Mari turned to the corner and then looked back at my mom and aunt, and Mari responded, "Oh, you mean Lila?" Then Janet explained, "Oh, don't mind her. She just stands there. She always appears at 11. Don't worry, she'll be gone by 3 a.m. My mom and aunt, followed by the other girls, screamed once again and ran out of their room. Thankfully, my grandparents were still there, and once my mom and aunt told them what happened, they rushed them into the car and drove away as fast as they could. You may ask why my grandparents just believed them and took off without questioning them to see if they were lying. Well, a few years later, my mother asked them why they believed them so easily. Their response was, "While we were talking to Janet and Mari's parents, they started acting strange. They started talking with their mouths closed. When they started talking that way, it was the same time y'all came out of the room screaming and describing how the little girl looked. Hence why we didn't even question y'all and rushed y'all out of there." My mom and my aunt never visited Janet and Mari ever again, or even played with them outside. My grandparents moved my family to a different neighborhood within the next 2 weeks. One of my mom's old friends reached out to her, and as they were catching up, talking about their childhood, my mom's friend brought up Janet and Mari. She told my mother that after we moved away, Janet and Mari stopped coming to school and going outside to play. Their grandparents went to check up on the family because they hadn't heard from Janet and Mari's parents either. No one answered the door, so their grandparents called the police. What they saw was horrific. Janet and Mari's parents were found dead, with stab wounds on their wrists and ankles and knives left in their foreheads with maggots inside. Janet and Mari were gone. I believe they are still missing. They would be about in their 40s, so they are either dead or in hiding because they could possibly be the ones who killed their parents. You could choose not to believe this story. It's really up to you. But the way my mom told me this story wasn't something I felt like she was joking about. My name is Zara, and this happened around 6 years ago when I was 8 years old. I was around 8 years old. I stayed in an old house since when my great-grandfather lived when he was born with my grandma, so about the woman in my room. Back then, I slept with my sister, grandma, cousin, and even though I slept with them, I was still scared. Well, because I was scared, it's because there was a bunk bed that my sister and cousin slept on the middle, and my sister slept on the pusher thing for the bunk bed. And I slept on the top of the bunk bed, which never scared me. The reason I hated it because it was hot. So that night I slept normally as usual, around like 3:36 a.m. I woke up to someone staring and smiling, but the smile was wide and sharp. Well, I brushed it off and thought it was my great-grandmother, so I had a picture of my grandma and great-grandmas, so I checked the picture. And then it shocked me. It was not my great-grandma or neither of my dead relatives. It was someone that I didn't know of. And then it whispered so gently and wonderfully. It whispered, "Zara," over and over again. Then I woke up from that. Dream. I was shaking. I was so scared and sad at the same time, but I didn't know why I was sad. Then the next day, I told my grandma about it. Then she said, "That was not one of our relatives." Then I shivered and said, "But who is in this picture?" Then my grandpa laughed, then said, "Don't worry, your grandma is just bonkers. It's your dead sister who always smiled widely." Then I remembered why I was crying. It was because that was my sister. Years passed by, and now I'm 13 years old, and still question myself, how did my sister die? And why did my grandpa laugh? It still makes me scared and sad to this day.